Lowe's knows July 4th savings are worth celebrating. Right now, get up to 40% off select major appliances and get an additional 10% off 2 or more select major appliances. Plus, get 3 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. These deals are coming in hot. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 7/9. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
What's up, everybody? You are listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. I'm Dr. Zach Baker, and I have with me today one of our 2 sports residents at R2P, Dr. Asher Roberts. And today, Asher is going to talk about a research article that he recently reviewed dealing with the concept of high-altitude training and how we can go about preparing for that. There's a traditional approach, and there's a few non-traditional approaches out there as well. And he's going to talk a little bit about what are the different proposed non-traditional approaches, how they are supposed to work, what you are attempting to accomplish, and what does the literature say you're actually doing. Then we're going to see how does that stack up against the traditional approach of acclimating to these high-altitude environments, whether you're going out there for a professional football game, you're going out there with your family for a spring break hike, or how you would approach that scenario in general. So Asher, if you don't mind, talk to us about the title of the article that you chose, why it was of interest to you, and then we're going to start figuring out what's the best way to prepare for when we're going to play, participate, or recreate in a high-altitude environment.
Yeah, so the article is called Improving Endurance Exercise Performance at High Altitude, Traditional and Non-Traditional Approaches. I kind of picked this article because really I don't have a lot of experience with altitude training. It was something that was kind of like a hole in my knowledge base, or like comfort base, if you will, as far as working with athletes, especially in like an emergency response setting. I kind of grew up in Frederick, Maryland, where we don't have a lot of altitude, and went to PT school and did a lot of exercise in Charleston, South Carolina, which is perfectly at or a little below sea level. So I am not very used to being at altitude and kind of what that entails. So I wanted to take a deep dive into that.
Very cool. I, as well, grew up on the East Coast, so minimal altitude exposure. I have gotten to go out west a few times, and I haven't done any extreme hiking or altitude work out there. But even going out to just some of the areas that are 4, 5, 6,000 feet above elevation, you go out there and you try to do your normal 3-mile run, or you go for your typical workout, and you start to realize, I'm a little bit more out of breath than I thought I was. I'm not running at the same pace that I was. I'm a little bit more tired today after this workout than I would be if I was at home. And then you start to appreciate how that may start to impact people that are participating in sports at a higher level of competition. There's a little bit more stakes on the line. Or for people who are planning trips, planning different outdoor adventures, and trying to figure out what is not only safe, but also realistic for me to accomplish while I'm out there, and how do I put myself in the best position for success to accomplish what I want to accomplish and also enjoy the process while I'm out there. So Asher, talk to us a little bit about when it comes to altitude training, what is the traditional approach, and what are we actually accomplishing with that? And then after we go through that, we'll talk about some of these non-traditional approaches that have been hypothesized, and we'll talk about the efficacy of some of that.
Yeah, so I mean, the traditional approach is just what they call acclimatization. You get to altitude a few days early and get your body used to things. At altitude, basically what's going on is you have a decrease in barometric pressure, which causes a fall in the percentage of oxygen in the air. What that does is it decreases, obviously, the amount of oxygen that's going into your body. So as you're exercising, you're going to have this kind of acute increase in minute ventilation. You're going to be breathing a little bit more, but that's not going to be able to completely restore that oxygen deficit. So when we get to altitude, it's very important that our body kind of gets used to that oxygen deficit and causes adaptations to kind of account for that. The biggest things we see if you do that altitude acclimatization over a few days is you're going to see an increased maximal oxygen delivery through increased hemoglobin concentration. So your body's actually producing more hemoglobin, the part of the blood that carries the oxygen to the tissues, allowing for that increased delivery. you're going to see just a natural increase in minute ventilation. So you're going to naturally breathe a little bit more to still intake that oxygen, but now we have the blood concentration to accommodate for it.
Awesome. And then that is the traditional way, and it's pretty cut and dry. You want to train in the environment that you're going to be competing in. So if you're going to be competing in a high altitude environment, we are needing to spend a little bit of time out there prior to that happening. Now, logistically, we can't always do that. So there are some other methods that have been proposed to try to mimic some of those same mechanisms that you get with altitude acclimatization without having to show up early. And maybe there's some things that you can do at home so then you can get out there and already be prepared. Talk to us a little bit about, I believe there was 4 different mechanisms or strategies that they talked about. Just highlight what that strategy is, what the proposed mechanisms or outcomes are, and then if they found it to be effective or not.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting ones here. Each of these are kind of trying to tackle different areas of those adaptations. The first one is what they call a cross adaptation, which is what they call heat to hypoxia training. Basically, the idea is you're training in heat instead of a hypoxic or like at altitude environment. And the idea is when you're training in the heat, you are having cardiovascular and hematological adaptations. So you're seeing basically plasma volume expansion with more exercise in the heat. This is going to increase your stroke volume and cardiac output. So in theory, you're like, okay, I'm getting better like cardiac adaptations. This should translate well to altitude. But what's really happening is your plasma volume is increasing, but you're causing what's actually known as hemodilution. There's more plasma. There's actually a less percentage of hemoglobin. So we're not actually getting that increased hemoglobin, that increased oxygen delivery to tissues. There were really only 3 studies that took a deep dive into this, and only one showed an improvement in performance, and it was about a 2.1% increase, which at altitude is like negligible at best. The next one is kind of tackling that minute ventilation increase at altitude, which is respiratory muscle training. The idea with that is we're increasing kind of the endurance and the capacity of those respiratory muscles to work. And why that would be important in theory is that as those respiratory muscles are working harder at altitude, you're basically having what's called a metaboreflex, which basically means there are metabolites building up in those respiratory muscles, which are stimulating the nervous system basically to cause vasoconstriction peripherally. You're getting less blood flow to like your legs, your arms, depending on what kind of sport you're doing, and you're getting more blood flow to those respiratory muscles, which is leading to a decreased performance. This one made a bit more sense to me than the heat to hypoxia kind of approach. But still, out of the 7 studies that looked at this, 4 showed improvements, 3 showed really next to nothing. And the improvements that we're seeing are somewhere between 1% to 16%, which again, the 16% is good, but that's really only one study showing that. And a lot of these tests that they were performing were in what they call a normobaric hypoxic environment, which means we're at sea level. We're just artificially making the environment hypoxic, whether that be through like a mask or something like that to reduce the amount of oxygen intake. And this wasn't actually tested at altitude. So the idea is there. We're not entirely sure if it works. The next one they brought up was exogenous carbohydrate, which is basically you're taking carbs to kind of increase your carb fuel storage. At altitude, you're going to be using more carbs as a fuel source. So the idea is you're taking more gels or like artificially having more carbs right before you're exercising. Maybe you'll have more fuel, be able to last longer in endurance sports at altitude. Really, all the research show with this is that it doesn't work, just straight up. And that the science behind it, I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. There are different pathways that the body's signaling and all things like that, but the exogenous carbs don't result in an increase in performance. The final one was kind of an interesting one. It's called ischemic preconditioning. And the idea with that is we're basically taking a blood pressure cuff and pumping it up on, say, your legs to the point where it occludes 100% of the blood flow to the limb. And we're just having you rest for about 5 minutes with the blood flow completely occluded to the legs. And the idea there is we are conditioning the body to get used to being in a hypoxic environment with those working muscles that we're going to be using for, say, endurance sports. The research with this actually showed a pretty consistent increase in performance, but again, pretty minimal. And the altitude that they were testing at was only about 800 meters higher than normal. So it's tough to say if this is actually going to carry over to performance at altitude.
So at the end of all of this, what is the big take-home message? If we're going to be training at altitude, what is going to give us the most bang for our buck to put us in the best prepared state to perform?
Yeah, you just have to acclimatize.
Yeah, so it's the tried and true method, right?
Yeah, no shortcuts here, fortunately.
Now, knowing that, ideally you can get out there a couple days in advance and you're able to train there, or at a minimum, just be in the environment. That's not always the case. So what would your recommendations be to individuals who, whether it's for sports or whether it's just for general recreation, if you're going to an area of high altitude and you're not going to be able to acclimatize, what would your recommendations be for them prior to going out for runs, prior to going out for hikes, or just enjoying their time out there?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that we can do is kind of set up expectations. You're not going to be able to perform at the level you're used to performing at. So if you're participating in sports, that's probably going to mean increased need for breaks. You're probably going to need supplemental oxygen to help you perform as you're taking those breaks to kind of restore those oxygen stores to the tissues in the body. And then if you're going on a trip, say you're going out west to Colorado and you want to do some hiking out there, you're planning on crushing 3-mile hikes every day you're out there, maybe you need a day to just kind of get used to the environment. Maybe the next day you're doing a shorter hike than you're expecting, and you're working up to those longer mileages because your body's just not going to be able to take it without some kind of compensation.
Yeah, or you just won't be able to enjoy it if you are able to will your way through it.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, Asher, thanks again for doing the dirty work, coming through the literature for us. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, like, and subscribe. You are listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast.
Lowe's knows July 4th savings are worth celebrating. Right now, get up to 40% off select major appliances and get an additional 10% off 2 or more select major appliances. Plus, get 3 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. These deals are coming in hot. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 7/9. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii.